Page 1. The Rivals by Sheridan. Page 3. The Rivals, Action of the Play. Analysis of the Plot. Act 1. Scene 1. From the conversation of two minor characters in the play, we get to know the situation that has developed. Fag, the servant of Captain Absolute, meets Thomas, the coachman of Sir Anthony Absolute, in a street at Bath, the fashionable watering place or health resort. From their conversation, we learn that Lydia Languish, a young lady, lives under the tutelage of her old tough aunt within single quotes. The aunt desires to marry her to a rich young heir, Captain Absolute, son of Sir Anthony Absolute. Lydia, however, has her young head turned by the sentimental novels that she reads without her aunt's knowledge. Under the influence of the amorous sentimentalism, she has preferred, quote, love in a cottage, unquote. Knowing this, Captain Absolute has come from London to Bath, and under the disguised name of Ensign Beverley, a halfpenny subaltern, he has arranged to pay his addresses to Lydia Languish. Scene 2. Lucy, the maidservant in Mrs. Malaprop's house, has brought a lot of sentimental novels for Lydia Languish from the neighbouring circulating libraries. Julia arrives just then, and Lydia and Julia confide their secrets to each other. Lydia tells her that she has a quarrel with her Beverley, a lover's quarrel within quotes. Before she could make it up with him, one of her letters to Beverley has been seized by her aunt, Mrs. Malaprop, who is pushing the claims of Bob Acres as a candidate for Lydia's hand. The aunt herself has fallen in love with an Irish baronet, Sir Lucius O'Trigger, to whom she writes love letters under the feigned name of Delia, Delia, or Celia, Celia. The talk now turns on Falkland, Julia's sentimental lover. The conversation of two cousins is interrupted by the entrance of Sir Anthony Absolute and Mrs. Malaprop. Lydia clears her table of the sentimental romances. She is introduced to Sir Anthony, but she refuses to marry any other than Beverley. Sir Anthony says that this obstinacy is due to the habit of reading. He proposes his son, Captain Absolute, for the hand of Lydia, to which Mrs. Malaprop readily agrees. After the departure of Sir Anthony, Mrs. Malaprop engages Lucy to carry another love letter of hers to Sir Lucius O'Trigger. Lucy receives tips from both Captain Absolute and Mrs. Malaprop. Act 2, Scene 1. Captain Absolute's servant, Fag, reports to his master how the news of his son's arrival at Bath was a shocking surprise to old Sir Anthony. Page 4. Witty Fag has invented a lie that his master has come down to Bath in order to recruit. Whether to recruit soldiers for his army or to recruit his health has been left deliberately vague. Meanwhile, Falkland, the lover of Julia, is announced. Falkland is told by Captain Absolute that his beloved Julia is already in Bath and is enjoying the best of health. This information is both heartening and depressing to Falkland. Heartening because Julia is in Bath, and depressing because she is bright and vigorous in his absence. Just at this moment, Bob Acres arrives, and his conversation further upsets Falkland. Just at this moment, Bob Acres arrives, and his conversation further upsets Falkland. Bob Acres says that he has seen Julia attend numerous musical parties and concerts at Devonshire, that everywhere Julia has been the attraction of neighbouring eyes. Falkland is unbalanced, for he can hardly understand how she could be so gay and lively when he was away. Bob Acres teases him out of his spirits till he is almost mad and is ready to meet Julia to have it out with her. Bob Acres departs and Sir Anthony is announced. Sir Anthony cleverly discloses to his son that he has a rich lady as the proposed wife of his son. Captain Absolute proves obstinate, and his father becomes angry. He leaves the house swearing and cursing. Captain Absolute cannot understand who is this rich lady selected by his father for his wife. Scene 2. From the previous scene, it is learnt that Captain Absolute is a candidate for the hand of Lydia, but Lucy, the serving girl of Mrs. Malaprop, will not register his name as a probable candidate unless she receives some tips from him. Sir Lucius enters, and Lucy delivers to him a letter from Delia, which is Mrs. Malaprop. By way of reward, she receives from Lucius some money and a passionate kiss. Fagg enters. To him, Lucy communicates the news that there has been another candidate for Lydia's hand, in addition to Bob Acres. She mentions the name of Anthony's son. Fagg is beside himself with joy at the information, for his master, with the assumed name Ensign Beverley, and Captain Absolute are identical. Act 3, Scene 1. On receiving the news from Fagg, Captain Absolute is beside himself with joy. He is amazed to see that his own choice agrees so admirably with his father's. He, however, assumes an air of penitence for his act of disobedience when his father enters. In the course of the conversation, the father lets his son know who the girl really is, though the son keeps up the pretense of ignorance and indifference in the matter. The father scans the loveliness of the lady's features item by item, and assures his son that he, that is the son, will come back from a visit to the lady, stark mad with rapture and impatience. The father scans the loveliness of the lady's features item by item, and assures his son that he, the son, will come back from a visit to the lady, quote, stark mad with rapture and impatience, unquote. If his prophecy is not fulfilled, the father will marry the girl himself. Scene 2. It is a Falkland-Julia scene. Falkland is all alone in Julia's dressing room, awaiting the arrival of his beloved. He curses his own capriciousness. 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 When Julia enters the room, Falkland is wild with joy. Julia assures him that she had no joy and peace of mind in his absence. She expresses surprise that the wild and irresponsible reports of a silly beau should so influence his mind that he will doubt her constancy to him. Page 5. He gives out the insinuation that Julia has probably mistaken, quote, the cold dictates of prudence, gratitude, or filial duty, unquote, as, quote, the pleadings of the heart, unquote. This sly hint is too much for Julia. She feels that Falkland is determined to be unkind and insulting to her. She leaves the room with tearful eyes. After her departure, Falkland realizes the gravity of his sentimental speeches. He is repentant of his capriciousness of conduct. Scene 3. Captain Absolute sees Mrs. Malaprop with a letter of introduction from his father. He is received very warmly. Mrs. Malaprop discloses to him all about the Lydia Beverley affair. Even one of the love letters of Beverley to Lydia, which had been intercepted by Mrs. Malaprop, is read out. In this letter, it was proposed that Beverley would arrange a successful elopement with Lydia, eluding the sharp vigilance of her aunt. Captain Absolute suggests to Mrs. Malaprop that she should be indifferent in this matter, allowing him, that is Beverley, the opportunity of arranging the elopement, but just in the nick of time, he, that is Captain Absolute, will outwit Beverley and carry the girl himself. Mrs. Malaprop is delighted with the plan. Lydia is now summoned to meet Absolute. She is surprised to find Beverley. Absolute says that he has managed to palm himself off as Captain Absolute. Lydia is elated with joy and asserts that Beverley alone will be hers. This part of the conversation is overheard by Mrs. Malaprop, and she is wild with anger at the rudeness of the girl. Lydia, however, persists in her resolution to love Beverley alone. Mrs. Malaprop boils with fury and apologizes repeatedly to Captain Absolute for the girl's astonishing misconduct. Scene 4. The scene is Acres's lodgings. Acres is decently dressed and is highly complimented by his servant David. He desires to have some lessons in dancing so that he may mix in high company and make himself more presentable to the lady of his heart. He is convinced that his toes are anti-French and the French dance is not meant for him. Sir Lucius arrives. Acres relates to him the secret of his coming to Bath. The secret is this, quote, "A rival named Beverley has unfairly supplanted Acres in his love for Lydia. Sir Lucius advises him to follow the only honourable course under the circumstances, and that course is to challenge the unknown rival to a duel in order to decide whose claim on Lydia is stronger. A letter of challenge is immediately framed, and the venue of the duel is fixed at King's Mead Fields. Sir Lucius asks him not to lose temper with his rival, but to do everything in a mild and agreeable manner." Unquote. Act 4. Scene 1. David, servant of Acres, tries to dissuade his father from the proposed duel, but Acres is provoked ruthlessly and will not revise his resolution. Captain Absolute arrives then, and Acres hands over to him the letter of challenge to be conveyed to his rival. Ensign Beverley. Page 6. He further asks Captain Absolute to report to Beverley that he, that is Acres, is a dangerous man, who generally kills a man a week. All this is done to strike terror into Beverley's heart, so that Beverley may not turn up to answer the challenge, and Acres may not take the risk of a duel. Captain Absolute promises to carry every message to Ensign Beverley. Scene 2. Mrs. Malaprop glorifies the character of Captain Absolute and indicates her choice as a better one than Beverley. Sir Anthony arrives with her son. Lydia and Absolute are left together, and Sir Anthony plays the eavesdropper in his son's courtship of Lydia. Captain Absolute discloses his identity as Beverley. Sir Anthony takes pride in his son's cleverness in the management of the love interview. Lydia is annoyed because of disappointment in romantic elopement. She announces to Mrs. Malaprop that she has given up Beverley forever. Sir Anthony suspects that his son may have been over-rash in his overtures of love. In his worry, he asks Mrs. Malaprop to reconcile the two lovers. Scene 3. Sir Lucius, thinking himself insulted by Captain Absolute, challenges him to a duel, and the place and time of duel are fixed at 6 p.m. at King's Mead Fields. Accidentally, the very hour and the very place fixed by Fighting Bob to meet Beverley. Falkland meets Captain Absolute and tells the latter that he, too, has been challenged by Sir Lucius. Falkland receives a letter from Julia in which she writes that as Falkland has already been sufficiently rebuked by his own conscience for his maltreatment of Julia, she is content to drop the matter there and to add nothing further by way of criticism of his conduct. She, moreover, proposes to see him soon. Falkland, bent on meeting Sir Lucius, thinks of using his engagement to fight the duel as a test of Julia's sincerity of love. Act 5. Scene 1. Falkland meets Julia. and communicates to her the news of the duel. He says that he has been unfortunately involved in a quarrel which will drive him out of his native land. Julia is disheartened at the news and proposes to accompany him to any part of the world. The frank confession on the part of Julia overwhelms Falkland, and he admits how he was using a silly device to prove her sincerity of love. This offends Julia, but she assures him that she will never barter her love with another. Lydia now meets Julia and discloses to her how her fond dreams of a sentimental elopement have all been shattered. Mrs. Malaprop comes with the news that a death-dealing duel is going to be fought. Sir Anthony Absolute, who might have averted the calamity, is absent. They all proceed to the scene of the proposed duel. Page 7. Scene 2. Captain Absolute is vexed at Falkland's unpunctuality in coming up as arranged. Sir Anthony unexpectedly meets his son. The captain is carrying a sword for the proposed duel. His sword, though concealed, is detected by his father. Captain Absolute explains that he is going to Lydia, and if she refuses to marry him, he will kill himself with the sword. Sir Anthony believes the story and allows his son to go. David, however, shouts from a distance and requests Sir Anthony to stop his son from rushing into the duel. Sir Absolute has already got away. Sir Anthony hurries to Kingsmead Fields, where the proposed duel is to take place. Scene 3. The courage of Bob Acres vanishes at the time of the duel. Sir Lucius, however, is resolved to make him fight. Captain Absolute and Falkland arrive just then, and Acres. Scene 3. The courage of Bob Acres vanished at the time of the duel. Sir Lucius, however, is resolved to make him fight. Captain Absolute and Falkland arrive just then, and Acres, without knowing that Captain Absolute is Ensign Beverley, extends a welcome to him. When Absolute's identity is disclosed to him, he boldly declines to combat with Absolute. Sir Lucius prepares to fight with Absolute, but they are intervened by the timely arrival of Sir Anthony, David, and the ladies. The duel is stopped. Lydia offers herself to Captain Absolute, and Acres surrenders his claim on her. Sir Lucius puts forward his claim on Lydia on the ground of the letters he had received from Celia or Delia, which in reality were written by Mrs. Malaprop. When the mystery of the letters is exposed, Sir Lucius declines the offer of her hand. Falkland and Julia consent to marry. All are happy except Mrs. Malaprop. Sir Anthony proposes to drink to the health of the young couples and a suitable husband to Mrs. Malaprop. Epilogue. The epilogue is recited by Mrs. Bulkley, Bulkley, the lady who played the role of Julia. The social happiness of man depends on woman. In every sphere of life, women control things. The ordinary citizen, the man of high birth, the jolly drunkard, the high-browed politician, the poor peasant, the voyaging sailor, the fighting soldier, all admit the supremacy of women in domestic life. If women combine sense and merit in their character, nothing else would be needed for happiness at home.